Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Putin's pitch. Russia has formally presented a proposal for the disarmament of Syria's chemical arsenal. Vladimir Putin has personally appealed to the American public and political establishment to give negotiations a chance in war-torn Syria. Though tough questions remain, primarily whether Washington can refrain from its habit of using brute force. To CrossTalk the war in Syria, I'm joined by Mark Levine in Washington. He's a senior fellow with the Truman National Security Project and a radio host. Also in Washington, we have Paul Kawika Martin. He is the political director of Peace Action. And in London, we cross to Alexander Mercouris. He is a writer on legal affairs and a lawyer. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Alexander, if I can go to you first in London. I'm sure you read President Putin's op-ed in the New York Times. How do you think the American president should react to it? Because, if I may say, in my opinion, Mr. Putin's op-ed reflects a great deal of world opinion.
I think it reflects majority world opinion. If you go back to the G20 summit, it was quite interesting that the most powerful countries, the countries with the majority population, actually supported Mr. Putin. As to how Mr. Obama should react, the answer is he should welcome it. Whether he will, of course, is another matter, but he should welcome it. This is a way out of this crisis, and one that suits Mr. Obama as well. It means that Mr. Obama has got himself, if he accepts this, out of a very difficult situation that he'd put himself into.
Okay, Mark, so Obama should call Putin and thank him for the op-ed, giving him an exit from a position that he painted himself into. Agree or disagree?
I don't know that he should thank him for the op-ed, but he should thank him for the proposal to dismantle Syria's chemical arsenal. I think that's something that, frankly, the United States and Russia can work together on. That would be a good thing. Neither the United States nor Russia would like Assad or any terrorist group that might get the weapons arsenal, chemical weapons, after Assad falls. Neither country wants that. So if we could actually disarm Syria's chemical weapons, I think that's something both countries can agree on. It's going to be very difficult to do that, and it won't stop the massacre of Syrian civilians, which, as you know, Peter, I've been concerned about for 2 years now.
Okay. Paul, but at the same time, we hear all this diplomatic talk, but we know that there's evidence that the CIA is sending in heavy armor now, lethal weapons into Syria. So Washington can talk diplomacy, but on the ground, it continues Obama's drive for more violence, maybe even a military strike. Paul.
Right. Well, as you can see, it's a good step. It's only the first step to get rid of the chemical weapons. But there's conventional weapons on the ground, being armed either by the CIA, being armed by Russia, and then the rebels are being armed by Saudi Arabia and maybe Qatar. So we need to figure out how do we move to a ceasefire. We need to stop arming both the rebels.
Hezbollah as well, it's fine. Okay.
Arming both sides. And that's the way forward. Historically, the only way civil wars have stopped is through some sort of a political solution.
Alexander, you know, this is a golden opportunity, but it's a very small part of the whole thing, because most of the people that have died in this horrific civil war have not died because of chemical weapons. Again, a lot of people will say this is a way for the Americans to get their boots on the ground, and then they'll change the course of action. I'm sorry, but that level of cynicism is present around the world.
Absolutely, and entirely justifiably so. Now, if I may say, the essential thing about the Syrian crisis is that there has to be a negotiated solution. There is, in fact, a possible process already in existence. It's been there for a long time. There's the Kofi Annan plan, there's suggestions for a Geneva conference. What has been preventing that process from going forward is the intransigent demand of the rebels that Mr. Assad resign as a precondition for talks, and the support that intransigent position gets from outsiders, powerful outsiders, including certain members of the US administration. Now, we have got to move beyond that point to proper negotiations. What needs to happen is three things. Chemical disarmament, there's a process already underway. Hopefully that will now happen. Second, a proper investigation of what actually happened on the 21st of August and who's been using these weapons. And third, and most important of all, a proper negotiation of the sort that has already been discussed many times, which Russia supports, which Mr. Assad has agreed to, and which the rebels should be asked to come round to.
Okay, Mark, a very good point there, but the rebels are furious, okay? I can't use the kind of language on television the way they feel right now. Are they going to listen to Mr. Obama? Or are they just going to get more arms from Saudi Arabia and say, forget Washington, we don't care what they think. They've never played a big role anyway. Go ahead.
Until the mass murderer, that thug, Assad, is removed from power, there will always be war in Syria. Hundreds of thousands will die. Millions more will be refugees. And eventually, when hundreds of thousands are killed and millions more refugees, Syria will be left as a failed state. Assad will be removed, but al-Qaeda will be in control. And that's not good for
Mark,
Russia.
Let's remember, Mark, tell our viewers that a civil war means there are two sides fighting each other, okay? Unfortunately, it sounds like you put all...
Three sides.
Okay, more than one side. It's not all Assad, okay? And this still is a sovereign country. Paul, you know, this is the big crux, and I agree and disagree with Mark, as I usually do on this program. It's really about the Obama administration having to eat its own words and walk back about Assad. Because if you're going to have a negotiation, you have to have all sides. And you know what? One side is Assad.
Well, I mean, I think Obama is lucky here, and so is Putin and Assad, that this agreement can go forward. I mean, they all get to kind of save face. Putin really couldn't stop Obama from bombing Assad if he wanted to. Obama didn't look like he had the votes in Congress. And, of course, Assad, I don't think, wants to have his friends bombed. So this is a solution that works for all of them. And then we need to focus on what our other guest said, which is the negotiation. And one thing he left out that's missing in the negotiation is including all the regional actors, including Iran, in the discussion.
Alexander, do you think that's going to happen? Because it's very interesting. There are a lot of different noises now about Iran coming out, which I think is positive, but we have to confirm them. But do you think the Americans are willing to sit at the same table with Iran after all these years?
Well, at the moment, they're not, and that, I think, is one of the fundamental problems. At some point, I expect they will. Similarly, I think at some point, unless there is going to be a military intervention in Syria, people, whether they like it or not, are going to have to talk to Assad. It's all very well saying Mr. Assad must go. Perhaps he should, but what you cannot do, it seems to me, is make as a precondition of a negotiation what might possibly be its outcome. The whole point of a negotiation is that people sit down and talk together. If you take one of these people out of the equation, and if you take away the very powerful country, Iran, which is supporting him, then what you're going to get is actually more war.
Okay. Mark, would you like to react to that? Because that's cold logic, but cold logic and politics don't always work together.
Look, I have no problem with negotiations. I think it's frankly that if it had not been for the credible threat of force, nothing would have happened here. Assad would have ramped up his chemical weapons. Remember, this is about the 30th time he's used them. First he killed a few dozen. Now he's killed thousands.
Okay,
I'm sure he would have killed tens of thousands.
Let's be fair to our viewers. We don't have evidence of that yet. We might one day.
Sure we
but
do.
we shouldn't say
evidence.
it is.
We have evidence from the UN inspectors.
This is what Western media does.
We have
if
evidence
they
from
say
England
it's
and France.
true, it's not true. We don't know yet. It could be true. My friend, let's wait for the experts to say it. Let's wait for that first.
The experts are unanimous about this. Let's be very clear about it. Let's not pretend that there's a question about who used these weapons.
These are all experts in chemical weapons. No, they're not. They're all politically biased, okay? Paul, if I could go to you in Washington.
I'm talking about people like Human Rights Watch.
Okay. Well, they made fools out of themselves.
The
Let me go to Paul. Let me go to
well.
Paul in Washington here. Again, negotiations, okay? I would like to think that most people would like to see the end of this civil war in Syria. Maybe Saudi Arabia doesn't, maybe Israel doesn't. But do you think Obama now has the strength to actually say, I've made mistakes, we can sit down and start real negotiations in Geneva, indirectly even? How committed is Obama?
Well, I don't think you need to say he's made mistakes. He could go ahead and continue to say, oh, the use of force was what got us here, if he'd like to. Only history will show if that's the case. I mean, let's be clear that these kind of negotiations and discussions about Assad getting rid of chemical weapons have been going on for over a year. So what pushed it to happen right now this second, we won't know until history writes its books. But it's going to be in Obama's best interest to probably solve this in a political way and not use military force. Let's be clear, it's a supermajority of Americans who are against military force, and the amount of political capital that Obama will have to use military force is going to derail his other priorities, such as immigration and so forth. So it's in his interest to solve this with negotiations and politics.
Okay, Alexander, if I can go to you again. Again, Mr. Putin did Obama a big favor here, if Paul is correct.
Well, I think so. I mean, I'm not an expert on American politics, but as far as I could see, opinion in the United States was running very strongly against all of this. Opinion in the Congress was running very strongly against all of this. Mr. Obama has now been given a way out. He's been given a chance to get out of this, to say, yes, I've achieved something. Syria is going to disarm its chemical weapons. I would say that up to now, so far as I'm aware, nobody openly asked Syria to get rid of its chemical weapons. But regardless of that, that's where we are. They have said they will do it. So now we can hopefully move beyond this particular crisis and start to deal with the underlying problem. And as far as Mr. Obama is concerned, yes, he's come out somewhat damaged from this, but perhaps not utterly humiliated as he would have been if the House of Representatives, as I believe many people think, had voted against what he was proposing to do.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll go to Mark and continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the war in Syria and Russia's peace proposal. Okay, we're going to go to Mark, and because I always know he has something important for us to hear, so go right ahead, my friend.
Well, look, there's a number of different concerns in Syria. If we get the Syrian government to get rid of its chemical arsenal, that's a plus for the entire world. It's a plus for Russia. It's a plus for the United States. It makes sure that one of the last regimes that has massive chemical weapons will disperse and get rid of those. That would be terrific, a wonderful result. It also will show whether or not Assad is serious about conforming to international norms. If he does not, and President Obama can then go back to Congress and say, look, Assad didn't keep his word.
Okay.
Now it's time to use
Mark,
military force.
Hey, that's fair enough. Mark, fair enough. But who is going to determine if Assad is keeping his word? Okay, who is going to do that?
Well, there are, as you say, there are international experts, UN experts, people like David Kay and others, who can examine a chemical weapons depot, say that it's gone. Under the Chemical Weapons Treaty, the new one that Syria is signing, they already signed the old one, promising not to use them, the one that they violated. But under the new weapons treaty, the one signed by 189 nations, Assad has to lay out where his weapons are, where they're located, how we got them, and how he's destroying them. Let's see if he keeps his word.
Okay, if he can do that under international law with all players involved here. Alexander, it seems really amazing to me as the country that is reportedly most concerned about the use of chemical weapons is a country that uses chemical weapons on a regular basis. I think you know where I'm going.
Well, indeed, I do. What I would mention here, and I think this is an important point, is that international law is, in fact, what is the key issue. There is a legal process. There are people who can carry out, help to carry out the destruction of these chemical weapons. These are technical issues. The people who must decide ultimately if Syria is in breach of its obligations is the United Nations Security Council. If you go back and look at Mr. Putin's op-ed today, and if you look at all the various things he's been saying, and which not just Mr. Putin, but many other people have been saying, is that this matter has to be dealt with in accordance with international law, not through the threat or use of force outside the proper system of international law, which places the Security Council and the United Nations at the center.
Okay, Paul, I mean, if we can look over the last 10 years.
Let me say this about
go ahead, Mark. But I was just going to say the U.S. of the last 10 years, particularly in the Middle East, it doesn't really care much about international law, or it twists a lot of things. Go ahead, Mark, and to be fair, go ahead.
I would say it's not that they don't care about international law, but it's true they don't let the Security Council bind the United States. When President Obama ran for president, they asked him specifically, if the United Nations does not allow the U.S. to go to war or votes against it or Russia gives a veto, would that restrict the U.S. use of power? And he said absolutely not. We have enforced international norms without the Security Council. I think Kosovo is a clear example of that.
And a lot of people would disagree with you on that one.
If these norms are violated.
Go ahead, Alexander.
The point about Kosovo is that intervention was illegal.
Yes.
That is the large-scale consensus within the international legal community. Some people say it was legitimate, but it was nonetheless illegal. Now, it is an extremely
What about the International Convention Against Genocide?
When people start to... Sorry?
Go ahead, Mark.
Genocide.
The International Convention Against Genocide. There was ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. There's mass murder in Syria.
Alexander, do you want to keep?
The point, well, first of all, there was no genocide in Kosovo. I think that claim has been comprehensively refuted, actually, by the events that followed. The point to make is there are procedures that can involve the Security Council. If the Security Council will not live up to its responsibilities, there are procedures that might involve the General Assembly. What is extremely dangerous is when certain countries, the United States, Britain, to some extent France, claim that they have a special prerogative or right, which no one else has, to intervene in those situations where they judge what they call international law norms as being violated. Now, you know, that simply isn't international law. It is not what most people accept, most countries accept.
Let me go to...
And I think that when countries... Sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to go to Paul.
Yeah, I mean, when countries arrogate that right to themselves, it's dangerous.
You know, very often the United States wants to walk away from the Security Council, but in this case, if Russia and the United States can come up with an agreement with other countries involved, obviously, of course Mr. Obama will go to the Security Council. I mean, again, to kind of echo what Alexander was saying, it's just gross hypocrisy. I mean, the United States has protected Israel from a Security Council veto 60 times or something like that. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, well, historically, we use the UN when it's in our national interest to use so, and we ignore it when we don't want to. That's happened. You know, getting back to Kosovo for a moment, there are those who argue that our military intervention there actually lengthened the atrocities, not shortened, and it was illegal on a number of fronts. It was illegal here constitutionally. President Clinton only had the approval from the Senate, and when finally the House voted on it a month later, it was tied. So he didn't even have congressional support for Kosovo. We need to learn how to move forward not only within our own laws here in the U.S. about the use of force, but within the international realm. Otherwise, countries are just going to start attacking each other willy-nilly, and they're going to be taken after the U.S. That will happen when other countries get stronger. We would not like to see China bombing certain countries just because they think they can without going to the UN or without some sort of self-defense. So we need to figure out how do we use the rule of law. That's the way to move forward.
Alexander first, go ahead.
No, I completely agree. I mean, the point about international law is that it is in the interests of the United States to work within international law. International law, the international system of law that we have today, is largely the creation of the United States, of American jurists, American lawyers, American diplomats, American politicians. They basically set up the system. Everyone else has gone along with it because it's perhaps not an ideal system, but it's a workable system. And it is a system that actually works for the United States, exactly for the reasons that Paul said.
The question is whether international treaties matter at all.
Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Mark.
I mean, there's international treaties against the use of chemical weapons that Syria signed. There's an international convention against genocide. And when all the great powers discuss everything with Security Council, there are 100,000 Syrians dead. Last time I came on this program in October 2011, there were 3,000 Syrians dead. Mark my words, if this is not resolved, there'll be another 100,000 dead the next time I appear, and 100,000 after that. At some point, the Syrian people get a vote, and they are being massacred.
All right, gentlemen, let's break it up here. Mark, just how many people should Obama kill in Syria to back up your words?
Yeah.
He doesn't have to kill a single one. I'll tell you what he could do, and I have to be clear here. President Obama's vision is not mine. He set a red line only on chemical weapons. I've advocated a no-fly zone for more than a year now. Here's what you do. You bomb runways. And when you bomb runways, no one lives on runways. But what bombing runways do is it prevents
you know, Mark,
the Syrian
I saw this movie.
I saw
this movie. It's called Libya. It didn't end very well, okay? It didn't end very well.
I think Libya ended very well.
Oh, okay, you don't live in Libya, okay? Paul, if I could go back to you in Washington.
But here's the thing about
if
Libya.
I go to
Libya
fair
is one
time,
of those few
guys.
governments
Fair
in the
time. Let me
Arab
go
world.
back to Paul. Paul, what do you think Mr. Obama is going to help the United States go back to international law? Because the last 10 years in the Arab world, without much international law, has really tarnished the American opinion there. It's emptied the Treasury. A lot of people have died on the ground. I mean, is this a turning point for Obama? And I still like to say, and I like to poke a finger, did Mr. Putin do Obama a favor?
Well, I'd like to hope so. I mean, Obama is a constitutional lawyer, let's not forget. And I would assume have respect for law. And I would also assume this is one of the reasons why he said he was going to Congress to get a use of force authorization. But unfortunately, you've heard from not only Secretary Kerry, but now Samantha Powers and others that have been thumbing their noses at the UN, which is unfortunate. We all know that the UN needs reform, and there's a lot of issues around the Security Council, etc. But it is what we have, and we should use it or move forward with reform. So I'd hope Obama comes back to the use of law rather than the use of force.
Alexander, when looking at Geneva 2.0, excuse me, do you think the United States and Western allies can get these radical jihadist groups to actually sit down and talk? Because, like I said earlier in the program, they're not answering to this call for negotiations at all.
This is the fundamental problem. I think if this had happened more than a year ago, probably they would. The trouble is, because the war has continued, and the reason the war has continued in the way that it has is because there have been no negotiations. Can I just remind people that last year, in 2012, we briefly had a ceasefire. We briefly had ceasefire monitors in the country, and it was the United States that insisted on pulling them out. Now, the trouble is, because that war has continued, all sorts of extremely dangerous and violent people, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, we all know who they are, have now come. And they are not going to be very easy to deal with or persuade. In fact, I doubt that they can be persuaded at all. Having said that, if we have a negotiation which does eventually result in a peaceful, well, a transitional government, we hopefully should be able to isolate and marginalize these people in a way that we can deal with them. But at the moment, when the war is simply going on because people are
right, Alexander?
I'm sorry to use this.
Okay, I'm going to give Mark the last word on the program. Mark, go ahead. Go ahead. Last word, real quick.
Yeah.
I think there's a middle ground here. And the middle ground is Assad has to go and Al-Qaeda has to go. And the fact that we have not helped the Free Syrian Army, the fact that, frankly, Iran and Hezbollah and Russia and Saudi Arabia and Qatar have all been involved, but we just started arming them 2 weeks ago, means that the moderates in Syria get squeezed.
I'm afraid we've been arming them a lot longer than that, Mark. Gentlemen, we've run out of time. Many thanks, to my guests in Washington and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love it.